Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the Shimmerz Paints August Color Kits collection. And I'm using this awesome piece of paper. I absolutely love it. It looks very 70s to me. And I was thinking that I could cut out the center section and use that strip of paper to kind of move across my page. So that was my first thought. So after I cut it out, I mount it on a little bit of white cardstock because I wanted there to be a border around the outside, and I also wanted to stitch on the paper, so I wanted to reinforce this paper with a little bit more cardstock. Not that the Shimmerz papers aren't very sturdy, because they are, but stitching on paper can definitely put a strain on the paper, and I have definitely made lots of holes in paper inadvertently through stitching on them. So I always like to reinforce my cut files or my pattern paper when I know I'm going to stitch on them. Now there's a thin border of white paper on both sides of this strip, and that serves two purposes. Number one, since I'm going to be stitching on the paper, I don't want to stitch right on the edge of the paper, so I want there to be a little bit of a border so that I'm not stitching, as I said, right on the edge. It will also help to create a little bit of contrast between the background and this strip of paper. I had already planned on putting either yellow or orange in the background, and I didn't want it to be right next to the blue. I wanted it to be next to white, so that's why I chose to do this. I use a glue stick to attach the pattern paper to the piece of white cardstock. I very rarely use glue sticks, but since I'm stitching, I want to make sure that there isn't a lot of gunk for my needle to pass through. That can just really make a mess of your needle. So I think that the glue stick was probably the best way to attach those two pieces of paper together. So there are 5 blue strips going down this paper, so I picked out 5 different colors. I'm going to stitch each of these strips with a different color, but then I decided that I had cut the strip a little bit too thick, and I really wanted it to move across the page, and I felt it was a little bit too thick, and if it was a little thinner, it would look a little bit more like there was movement to it. So now I only need 4 colors of embroidery thread. So I picked out pink, purple, orange, and yellow. And I use a simple back stitch to stitch along all of these blue lines. And when I cut the one strip of blue off, I left a little white border going along the edge of the outside blue strip. That way I wouldn't have to back it again with more white cardstock. I would already have a border like I did on the other side. Now it's time for me to create my mixed media background. As I usually do, I have a piece of gessoed white cardstock. This is a thick white cardstock to handle all of the paints and waters I'm going to put on top of it. It's 120 pounds. And I took my strip of paper and I drew a little pencil line just to show me the general area where that strip was going to be, so I could add my sprays and my paints going along it and not waste of paint putting it in the center where it'll be covered up. I'm using a piece of bubble wrap, and I'm using 3 different colors of Shimmerz paints. I'm using the Coloringz called Scarlett's Fever, and I'm also using a Shimmerz called Fire and Ice. Fire and Ice is the new color for August. And I also added in a Coloringz called Orange You Glad. And as you probably know, if you mix red and yellow together, you get orange. So I didn't want everything to just turn out looking orange. I wanted there to be specific areas that looked more orange and areas that looked more yellow, and even some areas that looked reddish orange, but I didn't want there to be a big, like I said, a big mixture of colors in a way that it would all look like the same color. So I'm trying to keep each area of color a little distinct. I do want there to be some blending of colors. I don't want it to look like patches of color, but that's what I had in mind when I was adding the colors to the background. So as soon as I saw the August collection, I knew exactly which pictures I was going to use. My older daughter found this event on Instagram. It was a fundraiser for an animal sanctuary, and it was called the Flower Power Festival. So it was just absolutely perfect for this collection. And they had a VW bus that was all decked out with all kinds of flowers and memorabilia. And so we were able to take pictures with it. And the van is orange, as you could see in the pictures. So that was why I chose orange for the background. I wanted the pictures and the background to kind of tie into each other. Once the background was dry, I went in with splatters in all three different colors. I wanted there to be a lot of splatters. Since there's so much movement on the piece of pattern paper, I was thinking that I could get away with kind of a messy looking background. So I added a lot of splatters, maybe no more than usual, but I love my splatters. So like I said, use all three colors and splatter them all around my background. I used my heat tool to dry that first round of splatters, and then I went back in again and added the splatters again, all three colors of splatters a second time, just to make sure there were plenty. I also wanted to add a little bit more of the Scarlett's Fever to the background. I wanted to make sure you could see that some of the areas were a little bit more red than orange. So here I'm adding that in a couple of places in my background. And although I didn't want all the colors to run together, I did want there to be a little bit of overlapping so that they would all kind of flow. If I wanted to blend the colors together when the colors were still wet, that would have had a much different look to it than adding a little bit of paint to the bubble wrap and pressing it onto a different color. I can control that application a little bit more. I think if all the colors were wet and I tried to blend them together, it would have had just that effect that I was hoping not to achieve, where all the colors would have kind of blended into one or much less noticeable areas of different colors. So anyway, now that the background is all done and all dry, I'm adding some stenciling to it. I'm so sorry, I don't know the manufacturer of this stencil. I love the way it has big stars on it, and then it looks like it's surrounded by dots, but the dots are actually very, very tiny stars. And then in one section at the top, I thought I had just too much stenciling in that one area. I tried to scrape some of it away, but that didn't really work too well. So I decided to allow that area to dry, and then I went back in later with the stencil again, and I just put a little bit less stenciling in that area. It's funny, both my sister and my daughter Danielle love the 70s. My sister and I lived through the 70s, but of course my daughter is too young for that. But she always seems to gravitate toward things that were made in the 70s. She's constantly picking up knickknacks and liking trends that I recognize that were originally from the 70s. So it's just so funny that she just seems to have that kind of taste. And my sister is also a big 1970s fan. She loves 1970s styles and music. And I can see why it's had such a revival. There really were a lot of cool things that came out of the 70s. So this kit is perfect for capturing any memories that you have from the 1970s, whether they were actually from the 70s or they're from the current era with 70s influence. So now I'm adding some splatters to the background. I watered down some white acrylic paint and I added that to my background. And now I'm adding some gel glue all over that whole strip of paper. I had to use a decent amount of glue so that the stitching would stick down to the background. And then once that glue was dry, I attached down my two photos. I printed both of those pictures out on my Canon Selfie. I used the feature where you could have two pictures in one page. I matted both of them on some white cardstock, and then I used a piece of lavender paper and I matted them once again on that paper. And then because my photos are resting on the piece of pattern paper, I put a little bit of foam on the right-hand side. You'd be surprised how much height that stitching gives to the paper. So I had to kind of balance it off a little bit by adding the foam on the right. I use a little piece of the purple paper to attach the two photos together before I attach them down. I thought that I could keep them at the angle that they were at, but then of course I changed my mind once I put them down. But it was very easy to lift up the bottom photo and angle it a little differently and then attach it back down again. So my thought for this layout was to take some of the flowers that were on the puffy sticker sheet that was in the kit and add them to the blue stripes that were on the background. I thought that would kind of add to the movement with the flowers kind of moving across the background. I definitely thought that that would reflect a 70s vibe. And there were all different colors of flowers in a number of different sizes. At first I was thinking I would try to just pick the flowers that fit into the blue stripes. But then as I tried the larger flowers on the stripes, I felt that they looked just as good as the smaller flowers. So after a while I didn't worry worry about that, and I just let the flowers overlap the stitching and sometimes go into the white areas. Okay, so I have to talk about that VW bus piece of ephemera. The little blue van that's on the right hand side of my top photo right now, that was the perfect embellishment for this layout, but I ended up taking it off of the layout because I just didn't like the way it looked with a big embellishment in that spot. I wanted the photos to have the embellishments on the left but not on the right. I just thought it looked like a cleaner layout that way. So I couldn't really think of another place on the layout to put it, and I was really disappointed because that was my favorite embellishment. So I'm going to have to make another layout using that little VW bus. But the absolute most perfect thing about the ephemera pieces was that there was a title that said Flower Power, which I told you was the name of this little fair or festival. So that was just perfect. So I put that right on top of my photos as the title. And then I have that cute flower with the sunglasses on to the right of the photos. And then a little cluster underneath the photos. I have a little mushroom, and then I have an ephemera piece that says yeah, and I really liked the way those pieces looked, so I just started attaching them right down to the page. And then I decided I was going to pop up that title Flower Power on some foam, so I'm adding a little bit of fun foam to the back of it. But you could see to the left of my mat there are a whole bunch of ephemera pieces. So there were a lot of really cool pieces that would have gone with the theme of this layout. So it was a little hard to choose which ones to use and which ones to save for another layout. And it could be a little challenging sometimes to decide which elements I should use on a page, especially when there are so many things that go so well with the theme. And that I moved the flowers around in the background. I was thinking that some of the flowers made too much of a line going in the opposite direction from the lines of the pattern paper, so I will continue to move those around a little bit. I love the little frame that I just tucked behind my top photo. I just thought it added a nice little element, but because you could see through it, it doesn't add too much like weight to the layout. And then I also tucked a little peace symbol over the flower, although I'm going to replace that with a different embellishment. So I'm recognizing that that van just doesn't look quite right in that spot. And after I watched the video, I was thinking maybe I should have included it. So I went back, I took that little van out again. It still had foam on the back of it. And I tried it in that spot, but it just didn't look right to my eye. So I had to take it off again. But for now, it's on the layout, and I do put some foam on it, and I do attach it down. As long as I've been working with Shimmerz, they've always included in their kits, along with many other things, dots. Dots are circular, I think they're epoxy embellishments, and I love them. They remind me of flare. I don't know if you remember flare. They were little, almost like those buttons that you wear on your shirt, but without the pin in the back. But they had metal on the back, or many of them did, and they were just never easy to put on the page because they were a little bit too bulky. But these don't have the same bulk, but they're just the right size, and I love things that have like a shiny finish to them. So I always try to use all of the dots. On this page, I used 2 of the dots. On top of the flower with the sunglasses, I included one that's a peace sign, perfect for this layout, and then a smiley face right under the word yeah. That's another, I think, really cute 70s iconic image. So I wanted to include that down there, and I thought it was just the right size. So you may know that I love photo corners. I often use a punch that I have to punch them out. So I punched out some pink photo corners from a piece of pink paper that I had laying around, and I inked the edges of all of them with some Distress Oxide. But very, very unusual for me, I didn't end up leaving them on the layout. I just felt like there was a lot going on, and in the end, I just decided that I had to edit a little bit, and the layout looked a little bit better without them. So they will go away, but I do think it was a good choice just because, as I said, I didn't want the layout to look overloaded with embellishments. I had a little smiley face next to the word yeah, but it looked a little bit too small, so I decided to add these yellow flowers or little heart centers, and I think that that really finished off that particular cluster. And I'm still playing around with those flowers in the background, trying to get them exactly the way I want them. I feel lucky that there were a lot of those flowers on the sticker sheet. I feel like they were just the right embellishment for this particular layout. And as a finishing touch, I added a little green dot to the top of the frame, and the layout is complete. And here are just a couple of close-ups. Please don't forget that if you place an order with Shimmerz Paints and you use my name in the comments, you'll receive a free paint. Also, if you want to check out in the description box, there are links to the Color Kitz collection, how to get a Color Kitz subscription, and also a link to the Shimmerz shop. I hope you enjoyed this video, everybody. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.